Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for June 24th, 2024. I'm sorry if you're getting this update a little bit late today, but I was in meetings all morning. There's a lot going on. It's a very touchy, dangerous situation characterized by strikes against Russian positions in Crimea using U.S. ATACMS missiles, as well as what appears to be an Islamic terrorist assault in Dagestan with multiple casualties, including among police. So let me just begin with the important details that we do have, starting with the attack on Crimea. Now, this has been threatened for quite a while from Zelensky, as well as from the NATO forces, that they're going to do what they can to make the Russians pay for being in Crimea. And so yesterday there were missile attacks on a beach in Crimea near Sevastopol. There were 4 killed, including 2 children, 150 injured, hitting vacation goers at a beach. These were 4 ATACMS missiles with cluster bombs. The missiles were hit by Russian air defense capabilities, and shrapnel and other material fell to the ground, and that's where the casualties came from. Now, Russia charged that the U.S. provided flight coordinator capability from U.S. reconnaissance. There's a report out now that it was likely guided by drones that were launched from a U.S. airbase in Sicily. All of this still needs to be confirmed. But the Russians said that from what they do know so far, it confirms U.S. responsibility. And the Defense Ministry put out a statement saying that such actions will not remain unanswered. Now, this, of course, has been part of the escalation, the buildup, the use of ATACMS missiles, the U.S. giving the go-ahead to Ukraine to attack Russian forces with U.S. weapons, with European NATO weapons, and so on. And as Putin has said, this would be a dramatic escalation which would have to be responded to. Now, how the Russians respond, we don't know yet. We know that Putin has expanded the idea of a Eurasian security zone. He had the meeting with the North Koreans over the last couple of days. There were meetings at the Defense Ministry today to discuss what kind of response there'll be. But what should be noted is that this has been predicted and been cheerleaded on by the war faction in the West. Just as an example, the neocon think tank, the Institute for the Study of War, which has people like William Crystal and General Petraeus on its board, they produced a map which was published in Newsweek, showing all the targets in Russia in range of Ukrainian-based ATACMS missiles. So if this is the beginning of an escalation, it's extremely dangerous. We'll hopefully have an update on this tomorrow. The key to that, what they're doing is the vilification of Putin. That Putin's committed to war, to conquering Ukraine, conquering Europe, and he must be stopped. And so when Putin put forward a peace proposal, very similar to the one that Ukraine signed back in the spring of 2022, it was immediately rejected by the West, by the U.S., by Zelensky, and so on. There was a lengthy discussion of this at last Friday's International Peace Coalition Zoom call, which included military veterans, analysts, and so on. And what was concluded in the call was that it's absolutely urgent that the West respond to Putin's peace agreement instead of a perfunctory rejection. Look at it, issue a response to it, not be afraid of it. But one of the participants in that conference on June 21st said that this may be the last chance for peace. Now, it's of note that Donald Trump issued a statement over the weekend that goes beyond anything he'd said previously on Ukraine. He was interviewed on the All In podcast with David Sachs, and Sachs asked him about whether he would agree to exclude the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO as part of the negotiations to end the war. And that was one of Putin's demands. No offer to Ukraine for membership in NATO. What Trump said is that the issue of Ukraine's possible acceptance in NATO might have been the provocation in the first place for the special military operation. Well, he's absolutely right about that. Putin has been saying that since the beginning of the special military operation. One of the demands from the beginning has been no NATO expansion. And this goes back to the 1990s and the early 2000s, when the Russians said that is unacceptable. In the famous memo from William Burns, at that time the U.S. ambassador in Moscow, later the CIA director, Burns said, for Russia, "Niet" means "niet," no means no, no presence of Ukraine in NATO. Now, Trump went on to say the following: for 20 years, I heard that if Ukraine goes into NATO, it's a real problem for Russia. I've heard this for a long time. I think that's why this war started. He said the current President Biden caused the conflict with his provocative statements during the escalating tensions before the Russian invasion. That is Biden saying no negotiations, we won't accept that Russia can dictate who can go into NATO, and so on. Now then Sachs asked him about Blinken's statements over the last week that Ukraine can be accepted into NATO. And Trump said, well, if he were leading Russia, he would not be too happy hearing these statements by Blinken. He said it was always understood, even before Putin's rule, that Russia does not want NATO and its forces at its border. He went on to say it's always been understood that was a no-no, and now you think you can go against their wishes. It doesn't mean they're right when they say that, but that was very provocative, and now it's even more provocative. And they're talking about, I hear routinely, they're talking about Ukraine entering NATO and how France wants to go join in the fight. Well, that's from Donald Trump, which does represent a slight change in what he said on Ukraine. Actually, it's a major change, because he's essentially saying that it's the insistence on expanding NATO which is the cause of the Russian special military operation. In other words, they were provoked. The idea that it was an unprovoked attack, which is the line from Biden, Blinken, the Macron, and others, Trump is taking issue with that. And this could be important in the long run. Now, you add to that the attack in Dagestan, which appears to be an attack by Islamic fundamentalists, although it's not yet clear if that's the case. The Russians say they know who's behind it, and they're not going to tolerate this, but they're also calling for religious peace because they don't want this to turn into a crusade against Islam. Now, is there an overall offensive going on against Russia? That's what the Russians are trying to figure out. It appears that way, and if so, this puts us closer and closer to a tripwire for World War III that could become a nuclear war. And so that's why it's significant that Trump spoke out. He should now come out and say he's willing to negotiate with Putin the terms of peace that Putin proposed. A negotiation is a negotiation. It doesn't mean an acceptance. But to refuse to talk, as Biden and his administration has refused, is an invitation to an escalation to total war. So that's what I have so far today. I'd urge you to watch what I'm going to link in the International Peace Coalition discussion from last Friday, because it gets right to the heart of the question of why it is, and the IPC endorsed the call from German representatives that there be an acceptance by the West of the Putin peace proposal as a negotiating as something to negotiate. So take a look at that, and I'll see you tomorrow.